The thump of chopper blades sliced through the air while Breezy Johnson stood locked in the starting block. February 8th, 2026. A suffocating hush had fallen over Cortina's legendary Tofane piste, the crown jewel of the Italian Alps. Moments earlier, the roar of thousands had echoed for Lindsey Vonn. Now, every set of eyes tracked the yellow airlift hauling the greatest skier of all time off the slope. For the contenders waiting at the summit, it is the absolute worst-case scenario for the psyche. They are strapped to thin carbon planks, poised to drop vertically down a sheet of bulletproof ice. Doing 85 miles per hour with a hovering reminder of the sport's brutality buzzing directly overhead. Inside the start shack, the usual mix of ski wax and nerves had been replaced by the heavy stench of disaster. The average competitor would have crumbled right there. Pulse rates skyrocket and that razor-thin mental edge instantly dulls. Yet staring down the barrel of the Tofane Schuss, the most vicious entry on the women's circuit, Johnson felt zero panic. She felt an obligation. Wearing bib 15, she had just witnessed her idol go down. She recognized that the American squad was teetering on the brink of total catastrophe. Johnson decided right then that the morning's heartbreak would not dictate the day's headline. When the beep sounded, she didn't just push off. She detonated out of the gate. The clock was no longer the opponent. She was skiing to salvage the spirit of a shattered day. Grasping how Johnson compartmentalized that trauma requires looking at how she literally rebuilt her existence. Arriving at this start gate wasn't a standard return to play. It was a surgical saga. Back in 2022, Johnson reigned as the fastest downhill specialist on Earth. But weeks out from the Beijing Games, her career imploded on this exact slope in Cortina. It wasn't a simple ligament tear. A chunk of cartilage sheared off with a noise she later described as a sickening crack. Sidelined for the Olympics, she underwent an operation straight out of a sci-fi novel, an osteochondral allograft. Doctors transplanted donor tissue from a cadaver into her joint just to keep her career alive. For 99% of athletes, that signals retirement. For Johnson, it merely marked the start of a grueling rehabilitation. 6 months on crutches, zero weight-bearing, relearning basic human movement before she could even think about snow. Between 2018 and 2022, she lost 22 months of competition to a trifecta of injuries. First, a right ACL followed 9 months later by a freak accident that shredded the PCL and MCL in the other leg. She and Vonn became bonded by their scars, knee sisters. They shared the same surgeons, the same titanium screws, and an identical rejection of failure. Vonn lauded Johnson's relentless attack, a drive that started every morning at 7:30 sharp. Inside a Park City facility, Johnson executed punishing stability drills to rewire the neural connections between mind and muscle. This wasn't about hypertrophy or mass. She was recalibrating the internal sensors needed to trust a joint reconstructed with foreign parts. Consider the physics of the Tofane Schuss. It isn't a ski slope, it is Formula One on ice. The track plummets 2,500 vertical feet across a 1.6-mile stretch. The launch sector boasts a 64% grade, a literal cliff face, bracketed by towering stone barriers. Johnson dropped into that abyss and went from standstill to 80.2 miles per hour in 5 seconds flat. At that velocity, the atmosphere turned solid. Johnson attacked the chute with a stance noticeably wider than the competition. It was necessary. Her upper body twisted violently off the initial kicker, a sketchy, erratic motion that would have tossed a rookie into the safety nets. Yet Johnson wrestled it back with what the broadcast booth labeled absolute guts. She drove her weight into the heels, recentered, and held a flawless aerodynamic tuck through the Scarpadon traverse. This is the limit, the red line. In downhill, breaking that tuck to regain balance creates air resistance bleeding precious milliseconds. Johnson refused to concede a single fraction. Gravity tore at her with 3 times its normal weight in the delta turn, her surgically repaired knee hammering against ice that hit back like pavement at 80 miles per hour. She flashed across the finish and froze the clock at 1 minute 36.10 seconds. Victory arrived by a razor-thin margin of 0.04 of a second, roughly the width of a ski tip in a masterclass of controlled freefall. She had dusted the first 5 races by a full second, but dropping in 6th meant the agony was not over. She took her place in the hot seat, forced to sweat it out while 30 more contenders launched themselves down the mountain to snatch her dream away. As Breezy occupied the throne, the cameras captured a side of the Speed Queen the public rarely sees. Beneath the helmet sat a red, white, and blue headband, a piece she had stitched together with her own hands just the night before. That yarn is her secret edge, a form of active meditation in a world of chaos. In a discipline defined by adrenaline and high-velocity violence, the needles keep her hands steady and her mind locked in. The wool travels with her to every stop on the World Cup tour, turning hotel lobbies and team vans into temporary sanctuaries. The rhythmic clicking drowns out the noise of the thorns, the career-threatening injuries and brutal setbacks that have haunted her path. The American Speed Squad leans on a ritual they call roses and thorns. They gather around the dinner table to unpack the highest highs and the lowest lows of their day. On her 30th birthday, just weeks out from the Games, Breezy opened up about her biggest thorn, the 14-month whereabouts suspension in 2024 that nearly crushed her will to compete. Yet she offered a rose too, celebrating how the squad had evolved into a true sisterhood. That bond was the lifeline that pulled her through the agonizing 20-minute hold following Vonn's crash. While rival coaches frantically obsessed over weather radar and wind speeds, the American staff was checking in on the hearts and minds of their athletes. Breezy was not just chasing hardware, she was racing for a family that kept the dinner invites coming even when the headlines turned dark. Her raw emotion at the finish told the whole story. Olympic glory usually triggers a primal roar, but Breezy Johnson stood in the leader's box and buried her face in her mittens, sobbing quietly. She had just etched her name in history as only the second American woman to capture downhill gold, mirroring Lindsey Vonn's legendary run in 2010. Yet victory arrived with a bittersweet aftertaste. She confessed her heart broke for Lindsey while word came down that Vonn was cheering her successor on from the medevac helicopter. It marked the definitive passing of the torch after 16 years of American speed being a one-woman monologue. In 2026, Breezy proved this program is nothing less than a factory built on resilience. She secured a global double-stacking Olympic gold on top of the World Championship title she claimed a year prior in Saalbach. That gold represented the very first medal for Team USA at the 2026 Games. It served as a massive pressure release valve for the entire American delegation. It demonstrated that you can take a brutal beating physically and emotionally and still rise to occupy the throne. During the ceremony, Breezy jumped so aggressively on the podium that the clasp on her medallion snapped. She tucked the gold into her pocket for safekeeping, a poetic twist for a woman who has carried her career through the darkest of valleys. That victory sent a jolt of electricity through the remainder of the 2026 schedule. By showing the Olympia della Tofane could be tamed, she smashed the psychological barriers for her squad. Jackie Wiles crossed the line in fourth, a near miss for the podium that would have dominated headlines in any other cycle. Crucially, however, it set the table for the upcoming team combined event. Breezy and Michaela Schifrin enter as the defending world champs in this partner discipline. Pairing Breezy's golden velocity with Schifrin's slalom precision makes them the most terrifying duo in Milan. The Johnson era brings a distinct flavor of leadership, shifting away from the Vonn dynasty style. It trades individual superstardom for the shared roses and thorns of the collective unit. This Western Washington University English major lives by the words of the greats. She often cites Churchill, "If you are going through hell, keep walking." Only she did not just walk. She turned that trek through hell into a full-blown sprint. Even the Italian faithful devoted to their own Sofia Goggia refused to see Breezy as an invader. They recognized a kindred spirit, a warrior who paid the Cortina tax in blood and bone and finally returned to collect her due. For Breezy Johnson, triumph in 2026 represents something heavier than the gold medal resting against her chest. It marks a seismic shift in the very soul of skiing. While Lindsey Vonn delivered the stardom the magazine covers and the global spotlight, the game has changed. In Milan, Johnson injected the sport with raw, unadulterated grit. She forced the world to remember that the path to Olympic immortality is never a straight shot. It is a treacherous, jagged traverse riddled with deep crevasses and desperate career-saving surgeries. She demonstrated that a champion's true legacy is not defined by hardware collecting dust in a display case, but by the neural pathways painstakingly rebuilt in the shadows. What happened in Cortina was far more than just a gold medal performance. It was the violent reclamation of a destiny snatched from her grasp 4 years prior. She proved that even when the medevac chopper is spinning overhead and the turns get impossibly sharp, the momentum never dies. The Alps have a new queen, and the throne is occupied by the ultimate survivor. The Vonn dynasty has officially passed the torch. The age of Breezy has dawned, and for the first time in 16 years, that gold medal rests exactly where it belongs.